There we go.
Great. Do you want to kick us
Sure.
off, or?
I will. I'll just introduce myself. Janine Wright, K-16 Partnerships Manager here at FEND. Thanks for those of you who are joining us today. Like I said, we're recording, so for those who wanted to participate but the time didn't work, they'll be able to kind of hear the good information as well. And there will be other folks who are probably joining us as we go on, so I will try my best to quietly admit them while we're getting some good information. I am going to toss it over to Hillary Kane, who is the director here at FEN, to additionally welcome you and to maybe get us going on some intros. So, Hillary.
Yeah, thank you. So welcome again. Again, I'm Hillary Kane, the director of FEND. And for those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a network of colleges and universities in and around Philadelphia, supporting and promoting campus community partnership. Pretty broadly defined, and that pretty much covers anything under the sun where campuses are interacting with their communities. Historically, we've done that through student involvement, volunteer services, service learning, civic engagement, but increasingly community-based research, other institutional commitments to nonprofits, local organizations, neighborhoods, et cetera. And within that, we have what we call our K-16 Partnerships Network, which Janine manages, and that's just for sort of all things university school partnership related. And this sort of fits in that bucket in that we have university researchers who are working closely with and in the school district of Philadelphia, trying to solve a persistent issue for not only Philadelphia and our students, but also folks around the country. So, and then I actually happened to come to this kind of in an interesting role because, and I don't remember how we were asked, but we were asked in the fall if FEND would be a part of the community advisory board for this study. And as someone who is personally interested in food justice and food issues, and also I just love to eat, and I'm a parent with 2 kids in the school district who have both been fans of and complainers of school food, depending on the year and the school and the situation. I wanted to participate. So I'm quite excited that we're able to now showcase the work. Before we get into turning it over to Gabriella and her team, I think we have a small enough group that would be nice to just hear introductions of who all is on the call. And maybe what your connection is to this topic. And so because I might know the answer already, I'm going to pick on Jarrett. And you can introduce yourself and then popcorn it to somebody else.
Hi, thanks, Hillary and everyone. Super excited to learn today. I'm Jarrett. I work at the Netter Center. I support the Agatston Urban Nutrition Initiative, which is a SNAP Ed-funded nutrition education program in Philly. I helped start Rebel Ventures, a high school student-led nonprofit food company in Philadelphia that has created and sold a product to school meals in Philly for breakfast over the last 6 or 7 years, which is awesome. So just really interested in this topic and what we're here to learn about. So yeah, I will pass it to Molly.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, I'm Molly. I just graduated from Temple, but past year I was working on this study. So I've sort of been leading the data collection and analysis, and I was in schools and working with Gabriella and Yuru and Garima and our great team. So yeah, nice to see everyone, and I'm excited to talk about our work today. I will popcorn to Yuru, I guess.
Thank you, Molly. Hi, everybody. My name is Jerusalem. Everybody calls me Yuru. And I am a co-research coordinator on this team. Molly and I have been alongside with Gabby and our 2 research assistants doing data collection and the analysis. And my specific focus was on the community advisory board that Hillary has been on, and an amazing addition to our team also. But yeah, so I'm excited to talk about the work that we've done also, and I'll pass it to Garima.
Hi, everyone. I'm Garima. I'm one of the co-research assistants. I go to Temple. I'm a senior now, and I've had a lot of fun this past year doing data collection and analyzing, and it's been pretty cool to see everything. So Nice to meet all of you. And I will popcorn to Gabby.
Hi everyone, I'm Gabby McLaughlin and I'm a faculty member at Temple University College of Public Health and the investigator on this study, and just really looking forward to sharing some of our initial findings with this really awesome group of people. So I'm happy to, you'll hear too much from me shortly, so I'll just stop. And I'll pass to Lacey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lacey Cornell. Sorry, I just got home from going to a school. I am the Senior Program Manager at Vetri Community Partnership for our SNAP Ed schools. And I specifically work with the School District of Philadelphia schools. And I will popcorn it over to Hallie.
Thanks, Lacey. Hi, everyone. My name's Hallie. I also work in the Agatston Urban Nutrition Initiative, and I am the Data and Evaluation Coordinator. And I have a master's in public health, specifically on food insecurity in the Philadelphia landscape. So this is really exciting. I will popcorn it to Stacy.
Hey everyone, my name is Stacy. I also work with Hallie and Jarrett at Netter. I do K-8 nutrition education during the school day and after school, and I'm just interested to see what you guys have done. And I will pass it to Jessica.
Hi everyone, I'm Jessie from the Food Trust. Sorry, I'm calling in from my phone. I have to hop off early to take my daughter to an appointment, but I'm the senior associate for our farm to school team. I help to oversee school programming and ECE programming. I can't really see who I can popcorn it next to.
Katie, maybe?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Katie Kerr, and I'm the Government Relations Coordinator at the Central Pennsylvania Food Bank. We are doing some advocacy surrounding trying to increase rates of school breakfast participation. There are some school districts in our service territory that have pretty low participation rates. So we're trying to figure out why that is. And we are also advocating for the universal school lunch as well. So just interested to hear your research. No, we're not really in the Philadelphia area, but still interested to see how your research could translate here to Harrisburg area and beyond. So thank you.
That's great. And I think Mignon is our last person to go.
Hi, my name is Mignon Burdell. At the Food Trust, I'm a community engagement manager. So in that capacity, I work with Jessie and our farm to school and farm to ECE teams. So just interested in finding out some information about this subject and seeing how it can work. Thank you.
Did we get everyone? Okay, well then I think I'm going to turn it over to Gabriella and her team to get us into this very large and comprehensive study and tell us what we need to know.
Brilliant. Thanks everyone. Great to meet you. And I'm actually kind of liking the smaller group because it probably will allow us to have a bit more of a interactive session. We didn't jam a disgusting amount of slides into this because we wanted it to be a high level overview. Obviously with that comes a lot of nuance in the data, so you probably will have questions that we aren't presenting on here, but I'm hoping that giving the high level overview of the findings will hopefully just avoid overwhelming you, but also give you enough to know about what we're working on so far. So as we mentioned, our team, most of our team are on here, except one person who couldn't make it, but we're really looking forward to sharing some findings with you. Our study is funded by the National Heart, Lung and Blood Institute at the NIH. And so all our findings are, just purely the data and not necessarily the views of the NIH. I have to just put that disclaimer out there. And I run the Community Eligibility Implementation Lab, which is just a small group of us at Temple who care about implementation science work and working with the community. And I'll explain a bit what implementation science is in a second. So our team is myself, Molly Yuru, who are on the call, and then Divya, who is one of our amazing research assistants. And we have been working together just for less than a year now. And so we have been able to kind of hit the ground running and potentially be overwhelmed and exhausted at the same time. But this year's absolutely flown by, and we've been able to work with some of the schools in the district, and just the amount of information we've been able to get already has just been really, really incredible. So we hope to share that with you all. I'm looking forward to being here. Obviously, why are we doing this study? I'm keeping the background very short. I think everyone on this call cares about increasing participation in school meals. Everyone on this call really understands that food insecurity and nutrition insecurity is a problem, and that we have federal programs in place, such as the Universal School Meals Program, or CEP, that are designed to address hunger and food insecurity in children and adolescents. But there are implementation gaps, right? There are issues that we have to uncover that might be limiting participation, especially as mentioned by someone on this call, that breakfast is lower than what the school district wants it to be. This is happening in other school districts. We also know that there are cost implications, so not just feeding kids for the sake of feeding kids, but we also want to make sure that school districts are fiscally solvent and that they can afford to keep providing high quality food to children and adolescents for years to come. And so there's lots of layers to this, but we care about participation for addressing food insecurity. We also care a lot about addressing equity in terms of access to food, just knowing the structural factors that are at play here. So that's enough of the soapbox, and since everyone kind of is on this call for a very similar reason. This is just one slide to give an overview of what our overall method is. As I mentioned, this is funded by the National Heart, Lung and Blood Institute. This is findings from the first year of a 5-year grant. And so the first year is mapping on to what we call a task in a method called implementation mapping. And implementation mapping is essentially a collaborative way that researchers and practitioners can work together to essentially arrive at a set of solutions to a problem. But before we can think about the solutions to a problem, which is low participation school meals, we have to do a needs assessment. And that's kind of where we've been starting this year. As someone who hasn't actually had a chance to work in a school in Philadelphia until I moved here 3 years ago, it was really important to me to start with this collaborative approach and much more of a community engaged approach, as opposed to thinking about a solution that may come from another study or may come from reading some of the literature without really doing our homework and trying to understand what the nuanced needs of the Philadelphia school community are, and then specifically what those needs are from students, parents, teachers, food service, and administration. So we felt like we needed to do this method because there are so many anecdotal findings or pieces of evidence out there to help guide us. But unfortunately, a lot of the evidence comes from people who aren't always as intimately involved or affected by school meals. And so that whole idea of nothing for us without us, we wanted to really hit that step and make it much more comprehensive needs assessment. And that was what we did this year. As you can see, it's kind of a cyclical fashion. And so the goal obviously is to increase universal school meals to address inequities in hunger and nutrition access. But to do that, we have to do a lot of things first. We have to do the needs assessment. That was this first year. We then have to think about, based on these findings from our needs assessment, what are some of the targeted outcomes we want to achieve? And then from there, we can map those outcomes, whether it be increased feasibility or increased accessibility of our school meals by students and parents, whatever those outcomes that we desire to be are. We have to then map those onto specific implementation strategies that can help us to test essentially an implementation extension. So we're building on the needs of this community to drive what happens next. And then is our sort of task 4 and 5, in which we are going to develop protocols and evaluate the outcomes of whatever we are going to test. So year 2 is going to be all about planning this mini increment. intervention to try to pilot trial something to help increase participation in school meals. So just wanted to give the context of why we started the needs assessment first. Even though it's pragmatic and obvious, it does serve a greater purpose in the next few years. So, as again mentioned in the grant, that I applied for a couple of years ago and we managed to get, which was really awesome. We budgeted for working with 8 schools in a very large sample of 270-ish schools across the district. So we realized it's still a small sample. But this meant that we were able to work with a very small budget from the NIH and actually do a deep dive into these 8 schools. 6 of these were elementary and middle, and 2 of those schools were satellite service kitchens, in which we had a heat and serve model as opposed to a full kitchen. And then we also worked with 2 high schools that had full service kitchens. This is a snowball sampling method. So we essentially worked with the school district who identified schools that were a little bit more amenable to working with researchers in a cold introduction. And then we sort of snowball sampled from there, and then from word of mouth. So this is not a random sample. We know it's a convenient sample, and we know that this is just a small part of the story. And just given our budget and time constraints, this was the easiest way to try to engage a small number of schools. We also computed averages for meal participation across the full semester for breakfast and lunch. And later this comes into play when Molly shows a little bit of our call data on some of the nuanced findings we were able to tease out when looking at lower versus higher participation schools. So one of the key goals was to understand what some of those nuanced barriers are for our lower participation schools. But I'll get into that in just a moment. We did a mixed method study, and so we used multiple ways to essentially glean information from our schools. When we were able to start recruiting, we met with principals first, and then we were able to make visits in the school in the fall semester to start giving out flyers and speaking with teachers and food service and students and parents. And the recruitment process really varied by school. Some schools were able to kind of get people on board right away. Other schools took a bit more time. And so the amount of time that we spent in different schools did tend to vary from school to school. But we did observe breakfast and lunch at least twice at every school. We then conducted what we called like a survey rollout. And so we built into a Red Cap platform, which is basically a Qualtrics or equivalent survey platform, the consent procedures for people to do their consent online. We provided a $10 gift card for every survey that was completed and a $15 gift card for every interview that was completed, even for our students. And so we wanted to provide a little bit of compensation to thank people for their time and their experience and expertise. So that's a very high level, quick overview of our recruitment process. But over time, across the 8 schools, we ended up receiving 158 surveys. We ended up doing interviews with 122 participants. Apologies for the text issue here, but as you can see, of the whole sample, most of our participants did both a survey and interview. But because when we walked into some schools and tried to kind of follow up with some survey recruitment, not everyone was interested in doing a survey. Many people actually wanted to talk to us and they wanted to share information as it came to them. And many times it was doing interviews in the hallway or in the cafeteria, which again was fine with us because we know that time is limited. So basically just to say that we envisioned that every single person would do a survey and an interview, but in reality it doesn't work that way. We know that schools are much more dynamic and much more less structured places, especially for doing research like this. And so we tried to really go with what participants wanted to do. So again, when we present the findings, just know that the samples are a little bit different, and we'll show the breakdown of those shortly. So in terms of the roles of participant types for each of the methods that we did, as I mentioned, we had a few more surveys than people that took part in interviews. And in some cases, parents would go on and do a survey, but they would actually give consent for their child, and they would just complete demographics, and that was fine. They weren't included in the final sample. They were only included that they could provide consent for their child to take part in the study. But of everybody that did complete our survey, as you can see, we had a large amount of parents complete the survey, followed by students, followed by teachers, then students, admin, and food service staff and managers. Then for our interview participants, we had mostly students that we interviewed, as well as you can imagine, lots of parents gave consent for their child to take part in their survey. We also were learning that even though we pitched our surveys at 5th grade reading level, when we interviewed students who were 6th to 8th grade and high school students, some of them didn't want to complete the survey. They just completed demographic information, which was fine. And just in talking to some admin at some of the schools, many of them said that it could be potentially that there was lack of comprehension of the survey. And that really gets into some of the equity issues that we're seeing, especially in some of our schools that may be struggling with reading level. But the interviews, as I think myself and others will argue, gave us more rich information and more useful information. So we're able to get most of our students and then teachers and admin were taking part in interviews, whereas obviously with the survey data, we had much more representation for parents, whereas in the interviews, we didn't have a ton of parents that actually took part, but again, enough to get a good idea of what people think about the school meal. And then finally, in terms of our racial and ethnic breakdown of the sample, we had a large representation from Black or African American participants, Hispanic and Latino, and then white. We had in the Black segment here, it's actually preferred not to describe, and then the green is Native American or Pacific Islander. But as you can see, we had some people who refused, who did not want to give that information, which is absolutely fine. And then we had 5% of our sample undivided statement. So these are fairly similar to district-wide demographics. And so we were pretty relieved that even though with the snowball sampling method, we were able to achieve similar breakdown to the district at large. And then finally, with our survey sample, we saw that of all the students we had in our sample, most of them, or the largest proportion, came from 6th grade and 9th grade. But again, we still were able to get students in 10th, 11th, and 12th, and 7th and 8th. So we, again, our findings aren't driven by just one grade level. We really wanted to get a lot of the older grade levels, especially since their voices are often not heard in this research. So what I'm going to do is just share, there's 3 slides that are coming up that are some of the biggest questions we really wanted to get at in our survey. And I'm just going to show you kind of a side-by-side comparison in our mean response data from each of our participant groups. So as you can see here, the black column is middle school students, our blue column is high school, gray is parents, yellow is food service, white is teacher, and then orange is our administrator. And we actually grouped climate leadership and deans of students and principals together in our administrators, because we saw that as we were kind of going through the schools, if somebody was a climate manager, they were typically kind of given a similar jurisdiction as someone who's a dean of students or somebody who is an assistant principal. And so we felt that that was more appropriate grouping than having them be in the teacher and staff. But if they were climate staff, they were grouped within teacher and staff. I think I meant to mention that before. But as you can see, one of the things that we wanted to know from people was what is their perceived impact of school meals? Do they feel like school meals help the low income students in their school access healthy food? As you can see, the highest ratings from 0 to 4, 0 and 1 being not agree, and then 2, 3, and 4 being in the more favorable categories. We had teachers and admin with the highest in terms of their perceived impact, and then high school students were our lowest perceived impact. So again, I realize this is not a complete breakdown of all the response groups, but to do it side by side, this was the easiest way. But as you can see, the ratings overall from high school students were the lowest. This is mirrored in when we asked every participant in the survey, do free school meals reduce stigma among students in your school? And we know that stigma and being stigmatized and singled out for eating a school meal is still prevalent, even within the context of every child receiving a free school meal. So this finding is potentially the most impactful for how we think about promoting participation, seeing that stigma is still a problem, especially among our middle and high school students. And then the last kind of side by side I'll show is, do people feel like they're empowered to give input on the school meals program? And then again, as you can see, this is probably the lowest rating from our students, with middle and high being the lowest. and parents, food service, and admin being the most favorable in terms of their ratings that they feel empowered to give input on school meals. And just because of time and context, there is a whole project that is just wrapping up now that was a measurement development project that I was leading with funding from the Urban School Food Alliance that was essentially a practitioner-focused approach to developing the survey tools that you'll see in this data. And I can share the adaptation guide as a link after this call as well. But basically, a lot of these questions are grounded in implementation science and health equity literature. And then from there, from key frameworks and models, we were able to actually develop survey tools to ask our participants. But just for time, I'm not going to go into that just yet. But again, these are just some very high-level findings. So where I'm going to pivot to now is some of the findings from our interview data. And so just for context, the figure on the left is an adapted version of the Consolidated Framework for Implementation Research, or the CFIR we call it. And the nice thing about the CFIR is it provides a structure for trying to understand determinants or barriers and supporting factors for implementation or implementation outcomes of a specific program or policy. And so we use this framework to help us code all of our interview data really pragmatically and really thoroughly, so that we didn't just end up with a list of potential barriers and supports for implementation and for uptake of school meals, right? So we were able to use this to actually deductively code the data and then provide us with essentially key constructs that were occurring in the data and pinpoint at what level are they occurring, right? And so the inner setting, right, is our school setting. So what things are happening within the school setting that could be telling us why implementation is not successful, why uptake of school meals isn't as high as it should be. Things that were happening between the school and the district, or even beyond the district level, they go in this outer ring here, and that's usually called the outer setting, but we just wanted to make it adaptation to call it the district and broader setting. And then individuals, so again, these are people who are implementing school meals, the school food service, our admin, our students, our parents, anybody else who's kind of aiding implementation. And then finally, this is where we have like characteristics of the intervention or innovation itself. And so any issues regarding the school meals themselves, the overall design, the policy that the USDA set for us to follow, right? Any factors related to the actual meals themselves, they went in this bucket. And this is just me giving a really crude explanation just because of time and not to bore you too much. But what we see on the right-hand side are a few, there are about 39 constructs in total. So again, we want to try and bring just a few to the table. These are a few constructs that we found to be most prevalent among the data and potentially most impactful to help drive future change. So again, we're still doing some more nuanced analyses, but I wanted to just share these overall findings with you all. So I'll explain what each of these are in just a second because we have slides to show some of the data for each of those. So we'll just start with some of the school meals factors here in terms of program characteristics and elements. So one of the things that we saw was just program design or menu design, if you will. So anything that was coded into this particular category were things like portion size, design, quality and packaging, the look of foods, the texture of food, the presentation of food. As you can imagine, we had a lot of comments from students and principals and parents. And so again, this construct really kind of gave us an idea or a place to put all of our data that related to people's perceptions of the food itself. And so we tried to parse this out. So as you can see, we're trying to provide some balanced data here because not all the data we saw were either positive leaning or negative leaning. But in our coding, we were able to assign positive and negative scores to extracts and interviews so that we were able to understand numerically what was happening as well. So here's an example of a positive support here on the left and a negative on the right. So as you can see in terms of the positive, quite a few principals had good things to say about the school meals overall. This principal from a satellite kitchen actually talked about that there's lots of fruit, fresh fruits and vegetables there, lots of food, there's food that's high in protein. But then on the right-hand side, a principal from the other satellite kitchen said that if they felt that the food quality was better, they potentially would have that stigma in the school. And then one student from a full service high school talked about how the food they felt really isn't presentable. It doesn't look appealing to most kids. So again, nuance and context is important here. And this is, again, just a very high snapshot of some of our findings. But you can kind of see some of the things we're able to find through our interviews and focus groups. So to triangulate this with some of our survey findings, we asked admin if they believe that free school meals increased the availability of high quality foods to students compared with corner store or things brought from home. And again, most agreed. So we have roughly 50% of people agreed. Sorry, 60. Wow, my maths is terrible. Agreed or strongly agreed, which again was a good sign. But there is again some issues in terms of discrepancies among people who are teachers or parents or students as well. So in terms of the perceived impact of school meals, we had a predominantly positive perception of how school meals are impacting children's health or children's hunger levels. And so many teachers talked about the fact that they felt like kids were more focused, they were more ready to learn once they had breakfast or lunch in them. And then again, with parents, a lot of them are struggling living paycheck to paycheck. They don't have enough food in their fridge to feed their kids. So being able to have that support system at school is a massive plus. And I wouldn't say these are necessarily surprising findings, as we all know, but again, it's just important to show how people perceive the impact and what the evidence base is in their mind for school meals. We asked students if they felt like school meals were helping them be ready for school and learning. So as you can see, we had about 40% of students agree or very agree with this statement. But again, we also had quite a lot of mixed findings here, and some students didn't feel this was the case at all, especially when we think about the first question around the perceived impact. So we looked at also some of the individuals that were receiving school meals and what they seemed to be doing at lunchtime, and what were some of the collective perceptions of students from other perspectives. So this insight from a principal was really interesting. Saying their students are very vocal, they tried to teach them to advocate for themselves. And so they felt like it was a positive that students were able to share their opinions, at least to climate staff and food service and principals at their school. But in terms of some of the more negative and potentially negative terms of implementation is students will bring more snacks. And so it just means that they're not as able to or willing to eat the school meals, and therefore bringing snacks each day means they probably aren't as interested in participating in school meals. And then this one group of students talked about how they might take a meal, but then they'll only drink the milk. And as we know, with the policy, we have to serve complete meals to students to get the reimbursement. And so we were sort of seeing this a lot in terms of food waste, is that students would actually take the meal, but maybe eat one or two things, and then they'll bring their own food to supplement the things they don't like. And we can debate whether this is good or bad, but this is again some of the things we saw. We also talked about, in terms of some of the cafeteria culture items, if parents felt like feeling stigmatized impact their or their child's decision to take part in school meals. And as you can see, even though most people tended to disagree, we did seem to have quite a number of parents, so around 20 parents agreed or strongly agreed in that sample that there was an issue with stigma with their kids. In thinking about school leadership, we saw generally really positive findings from teachers, principals, parents, and other climate staff around how they felt like their principal was engaged in promoting participation. So one principal actually went back to help serve when the staff was short. Whether that's allowed or not, we're not commenting on that, but again, just showing some of the dedication to improving school meal access. Climate leadership, playing music during cafeteria, trying to make the cafeteria environment quite friendly and welcoming to encourage participation. Those are some examples we saw of involvement and promotion from the higher up staff. And then again, roughly half of school teachers and staff feel their principal took an active role in trying to implement and promote school meals. So talking about some of the inner school setting factors, one thing we know is not quite surprising, but just the lack of resources, whether it be staff, equipment, time. These were some of the negative determinants that we got to code in available resources implementation. So one example on the left-hand side, was that there just wasn't enough staff to be able to implement the program effectively. And then on the right-hand side, quite a lot of students talked about their perceived lack of time to eat school meals. And so again, that issue of time as a resource came across a lot. We also coded issues regarding time when people talked about a mismatched or unfavorable schedule. So let's say, for instance, at some schools, lunch for the 9th graders started at 10 a.m. when they only got to school at 8 a.m. just purely because of the timing and scheduling of things. That lack of time or perceived lack of flexibility of time does impact negatively on participation, especially as some students would leave at 2 and be hungry because they only had one chance to eat at 10, right? And so a lot of these findings we saw relating to staffing, resources, available equipment, and time were some of the biggest factors for some of the most popular negative constructs that we coded. And then about 60% of school teachers and staff felt that the school meals program requires more work than being accomplished with current resources. So again, just really struggling in terms of resources needed. And then we talked a little bit about stigma a few slides ago, but just some of the actual data that we saw. In some schools, we were able to learn from climate staff, from teachers, that they feel like at school, lunch is really their only time to be sociable and to have that release and be with their friends. And so for many climate staff, they've really talked about how they try to make it a much more friendly and social atmosphere. But again, talking to some of the students and even some of the teachers and parents, a lot of the time the word freebie gets thrown around. As we know, in Philadelphia, it's a big word that talks about stigmatizing of free school meals. This is a really impactful quote from one student talking about, they essentially say, you suffer if you take a free meal. And so we found an overwhelming amount of data from students talking about the freebie and talking about how they see people get treated differently. We didn't use the word stigma with students, we used the word singled out or treated differently or embarrassed. But the data are overwhelmingly showing still a massive issue. And then finally going through to some of the more outer setting factors, so within the district or broader, thinking about local attitudes. And this construct really tries to disentangle some of the issues that could be related to lack of alignment with a school menu between what's served at school and what typically families eat at home. It could be attitudes collectively regarding the school's place in serving school meals, the purpose of that school as a hub for addressing food insecurity and hunger. So as you can see, one positive quote that we saw was that one parent felt like the school had done a lot to be, and the district done a lot to be more inclusive around school meals. They become very inclusive, serving different foods like falafels and other bits and pieces. And they felt it was a good way to address different cultures. But then again, a lot of the time, because the district is so big, the menu has to be accommodating to multiple cultures. And so sometimes admin and staff felt that there maybe wasn't enough done to address some of the particular nuances in their school when it came to different cultures and different backgrounds in terms of getting them and making families feel more included in the menu of the schools, which we know is hard. So that kind of lent itself to thinking about the school foods are very American, very kind of like your standard American diet, and that might not be always appealing to families. And so when we ask parents if they feel that the school meals program or the menu takes their culture and the culture of the local area into account, we didn't see a ton of parents say no. So we saw, 29% said somewhat, and then 20% said a lot. But we still had roughly a half of people said that either didn't apply or they didn't feel like it took their culture into account at all. And then the last couple of pieces from the outer setting, local environment. And so any data that was coded here where extracts are related to potential community violence in the district or the neighborhood, presence of local corner stores or other competitive foods and beverages that are sold near school that would potentially compete with a child's or a student's desire to take part in breakfast or lunch. So as you can see, we had a mostly negative coded data going to this construct. And two examples are from one teacher from full service and from satellite schools. So on the left, you can see a lot of language related to just quick meals, corner stores or fast food being so close to the school, which means that students can essentially pick up a lot of food that's not served at school, but potentially more tasty or appealing because it is less healthy. And then I think just alluding to this quote we really liked from a teacher talking about their exposure, because there is such an environment where we have these structural factors that are much more conducive to unhealthy foods or corner store foods that aren't served at school. It just means that their exposure and socialization towards school food is just very limited. And so even though it might taste good, it might not be what they actually want because of just the amount of exposure and influence that their local environment has on them. And this is a big thing and something that I'm not sure how we can change, but it's so important to be mindful of this and to put this into whatever we try to do next. Because this definitely came across like an overwhelming issue across the district. And then again, even though we have these difficult barriers to face, overall teachers strongly agree that this policy, so the school meals program, improves the nutrition of students who lack consistent access to school food. So I'm just going to pass to Molly to present this slide, so about some of the nuances among higher and lower participation schools. So Molly, feel free to jump in here.
Yeah, so we were able to use the participation data that the district collects to sort of split our 8 schools into either high or low participation in both breakfast and lunch so that we could explore sort of differences across those 2 groups. And we did see that as far as the culture around school meals, in the low participation group, there were a lot more mentions of stigma and embarrassment associated with taking the meals, as opposed to in the high participation groups, we saw a lot more of those mentions of the positive social aspects of meals, students excited to see their friends and get a break from class, as well as in the high participation group, there was a lot more positive comments around breakfast in the classroom and sort of the benefits of that. So that was definitely a positive thing. And then as far as differences in neighborhood conditions, it was interesting because in the low participation group, we saw more of those mentions of an overabundance of fast foods and corner stores, sort of almost like a food swamp environment, as we would call it. And then in the high participation groups, there was a lot more mentions of low access to grocery stores and limited access to fresh fruits and vegetables. So more of that like food desert type of environment. And then also in the high participation groups, there were a lot more mentions of neighborhood crime and violence, unfortunately. And then as far as differences in need, we saw a lot more mentions of hunger and food insecurity in the high participation groups. That makes sense. If there's more of a need for school meals, they're going to be relying on them and eating a little bit more. So that made sense to us. But at the same time, we also saw in that same group that there were a lot more mentions of the school meals meeting the needs of the students. So although the need was higher, their needs were also being met by the school. So that was also a more positive thing. And then another thing to note about the need for school meals is that we saw a lot more parents in the high participation group mentioning that need. So that was a difference between the high and the low. But yeah, those were the main findings between the 2 participation groups.
Thanks, Molly. So obviously this is a really high level overview of the findings. We've got a couple more slides and then I think we can go into some more discussion. But some of the next steps, so as we mentioned, we're using the findings across the city and starting to share them at conferences within the US and internationally and other audiences to raise awareness of school meals and just to show the data, because even when we were doing our literature reviews or writing these grants, the data from a student and parent perspective in the context of a holistic evaluation like this is just so lacking. And so we hope that the data actually can also be used to drive some local efforts too. But this is actually our first like larger than Temple audience presentation of the findings. And we wanted to start locally before we expanded out into more broad geographics. So again, these findings are now being used to drive what happens in year 2, which is to develop and tailor an implementation strategy, which is basically trying to design something that we can add on to school meals or try to change about the school meals in a small cluster of schools to actually test the effect of that, if it's going to increase uptake or not. And then we also have a community advisory board, and we're building a larger list to share updates. And Yuru is just going to share a little bit about our tab and what we've done this year.
Yeah, Gabby kind of briefly touched on it, but we wanted to make sure that this was a collaborative effort and that if possible, we could avoid any mistakes that any previous attempts have been made, and that just being able to rely on the insight of community members with a similar mindset. So we did make sure that we integrated organizational reps, parents, and students in building our community advisory board. You can see the picture below of most of our members. Unfortunately, Hillary wasn't there that meeting. But yeah, so we've been working alongside the school district and the community advisory board in sharing our recruitment process and getting any insight or getting any feedback on ways that we could have improved recruitment, and just building that trust within schools, because you know research doesn't have the best image, especially in vulnerable communities like Philly. And being able to share our data collection process and understanding how we could share our findings with the community and the schools that we're working with. So all of our products that we've designed have been either co-designed or reviewed by our community advisory board. So this looks like either this presentation or the 2-pager that Gabby just sent out. But also our infographics that we'll be sharing with the schools. These have all been collaboratively designed with our community advisory board members. And there's an example on the next slide of this is our infographic that we're sharing with our different schools that have participated, but also the school district. And like Gabby did say, we are hoping to be able to keep any other interested parties in the loop as we're continuing with the next few years of the study. So if you guys are interested, we will be building that listserv.
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, so we disseminated the district report out last week. I also met with the school district and our partners there in the Division of Food Service and the Office of Research on Tuesday. So they were able to provide input on these slides. And so we're just trying to be better partners and make sure that all of the dissemination we put out is really designed with the community in mind first, as opposed to a research audience, which we know hasn't always been done. And it just makes it so much easier for us to feel like the community is engaged when they have power of what we do. And that power actually makes it so much more enjoyable for us to do this job, because it actually gets them more engaged. And it's just been such a great experience for us to learn about all what's happening across the city beyond this study, since we can get so wrapped up in the work that we're doing, and we forget to just really look around and see what everyone else is doing. So yeah, just want to echo what you said around the community engaged approach. That's what's going to drive what happens next. And essentially this part of dissemination is all part of the science too, because getting input from people on this call is going to actually help us with thinking about what's to come. We don't have the answers, and we hope that like this method allows us to be much more collaborative and share that power, which is I think the biggest impact that we hope to make. So with that, we'll just say thank you for listening to the presentation, and we hope to have an interactive discussion with some Q&A. Our lab email is there, and my email is there if people have questions. And on the 2-pager that I just put in the chat, our email is also at the QR code, and we'd love anyone to get in touch and to continue this conversation further. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. I'll stop now.
Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you. As you can see, it's very comprehensive. I think there was some point on the advisory board where you passed out literally like a 15-page description of all the different factors that could impact school food take up. And I was just like overwhelmed. I was like, wow, yes, yes, this counts too. Oh my goodness. And it was just like, this is super comprehensive. So yeah, I'm just going to open it up. I mean, if you can use your Zoom hand, that's easy. If you want to use your actual hand, whatever you need to do to jump in with a question or comment. I know we have some new folks since we started, but yeah. Jarrett.
Yeah, amazing work. I think, like a lot of the folks on this call are SNAP Ed partners in the district working, like sort of around the education side. And it seems like a lot here is connected to education, a lot around school food education, which isn't exactly what we do, but just curious, like what has been your connection? Are you like not allowed to work with SNAP Ed and for some reason, or like, do you have plans? Like what sort of is the overlap between your work here and like what you're thinking about how SNAP Ed could be connected to it?
That's a great question. And I knew you were going to ask something about that, and I was looking forward to getting a little dialogue about this going. So we meet with the school district monthly, and not only do we meet with the Division of Food Service and the Office of Research, we also meet with SNAP Ed and Lauren Osito during those calls monthly. And so what our ongoing conversations have kind of been dabbling around this area of like, well, what can SNAP Ed offer in terms of building what comes next? And so I think our MO was to sort of do the needs assessment, see what we find, and then use the evidence that we see in this whole first year of the study to think meaningfully about how SNAP Ed's existing infrastructure can help here. So I don't want to be the person that drives what happens next solely, because it is a collaborative process, and I'm in danger of, being the classic academic that tries to just put their ideas out and make that be the sole driving force. But I would really like to partner with SNAP Ed to not only develop our protocols and what happens next in terms of what is it that we want to test out, but I would love to see them as a potential delivery partner in maybe some form of education campaign, or simply just trying to help us co-design products that could also be shared with SNAP Ed if the pilot trial was successful. And then we can help thinking about using the structure that we have with SNAP Ed as this beautiful dissemination and scale-up structure. So I see them being a partner in this, and I hope that they will be a huge asset in scale-up. However, I'm just really mindful that like I don't work in SNAP Ed, and I don't want to dump more on these practitioners than they already have going on right now. But yeah, I think that's really going to come into the next steps of things, and I think that's going to be much more intentional now. We just didn't know what we were going to find, and so I didn't want to start to sort of lay out plans or try to throw people in if I didn't fully know what I felt like they could do. But now I think we're at a point where we do have an idea of what that's going to look like, but I want that to come from what SNAP Ed wants to do rather than like what we think they should do, if that makes sense.
Mignon.
Hello. Hopefully my sound isn't too loud in the background. I had wanted to ask a question about the Food Trust runs operates the Pennsylvania Farm to School Network, where a lot of like advocacy and campaign and research is happening into talking to, school food service directors and trying to, because I feel like SNAP Ed kind of comes at it from one angle, but then like actually trying to, sort of change the environment and the food that's served and trying to get, schools access to and better connected to local farmers, et cetera, is like something that is also feels like instrumental in this work. And so I was actually messaging some colleagues that are running a Farm to School Institute with school administrators who are, I think, like coming together to like try to do efforts like this at their schools. And so I'd love to share this resource. But also, yeah, I just wanted to find out if you knew about the Pennsylvania Farm to School Network work, and and if there's an opportunity maybe to make this presentation to some sort of core group or core work group of folks who are kind of asking these same questions and know a lot of this information about school meals and how they're and kids' responses to them and things like that.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Mignon. So I knew about the Farm to School Network. One of the things that we were trying to wrestle with in writing the grant was that obviously we know that there's a lot of opinions about school food and the menu has limitations for sure. One thing I don't know, and you probably have way better expertise than I, is how feasible it would be to actually implement more farm to school initiatives. And one thing that we learned in the needs assessment was just the level of power the school has over their menu versus the district at large. And so I've been trying to sort of feel out from the district, from their end, how feasible some of these menu changes would be, and just learning about the procurement contracts they have with different suppliers. I think I sort of stopped there because I realized that it's such a massive machine, and I didn't know or didn't feel confident that we could just start to implement some of these things within the next year or two. But that's all I really know, honestly. So I'd love any kind of insights you have on like feasibility, or even if we can't implement some changes like that, what would be a plan after this trial, right? What would be coming to the pipeline the next few years after this? I don't know that part at all. So I'd love any ideas you have.
Great. I mean, I work with that team, so I don't do that work directly, but would love to connect you with our Pennsylvania Environmental School Network staff, because I think that, you know, where you stopped makes a lot of sense. It is like a kind of a mountain / monster, but there are folks who, you know, who spent like more dedicated time trying to penetrate that, and I think have done some pilot work. So yeah, I'd love to afterwards just connect you with that team and see if you can maybe join a meeting, or, you know, just hear what other people have, what progress people have made, and how this work could feed into that.
Yeah. I see Janine and then Jarrett.
Hi, Gabby and team, yet again. Like Hillary, I have 2 kids that have gone through the school district, and I'm just wondering, in terms of your interactions with young people, did any of them talk about the timing of school meals, and also the amount of school meals, which, as you can probably tell, were big issues in my household. So I'm just curious as to what kind of feedback you all got around that.
Yeah, so scheduling was such an interesting thing. We saw, well, number one, we actually saw one school in our sample change breakfast to be like half an hour earlier, to start school earlier. And that was definitely an issue for many families to try and get their kids to school. We also saw that in a lot of high schools, people were able to eat food in the first period because of just the way that timing worked. And again, the schools were just so early to start. I think a lot of kids just would get there and then they'd be like, okay, well, I have no time to eat now. To increase participation, a lot of grab and go was implemented. But then when it came to the time or the gap in between breakfast and lunch, a lot of students said there's either not enough time, so then they're not really hungry at lunchtime. If they have to go into the cafeteria at 10 or 10:30, that wasn't really like a time they wanted to eat lunch. So then it was just futile to go. And then especially in our older middle grades and high school grades, they definitely had things to say about the portion size. They weren't enough. There weren't enough chicken nuggets, or there wasn't enough drink options, that they just had milk and they wanted juice or water. And so just like in general, the volume of food didn't seem to be enough for a lot of people, especially we interviewed or talked with like definitely growing people, like way taller than me. And I'm like, I definitely couldn't, get by just on that. I'm not sure how, these like teenagers who are growing like rapidly were able to survive on that. So yeah, and so unfortunately it leads to this issue of many students said that they would then just bring food from home or the corner store to like offset what they weren't getting at school. But if you can imagine, if they're getting into the pattern of bringing food from the corner store or somewhere else competitive, they might just say, okay, well, then I'll just do this and then I'll just skip lunch and go to recess or hang out with friends. And it slowly becomes this like maladaptive strategy to deal with the fact that like they can't really trust or depend on the fact that school meals are going to be there to fulfill them. So it's kind of like, well, then why bother at all? And so we saw various kind of like insights or methods to adapt to those issues among students, and some of the things that they would do, like they will take this milk, but then they'll have their Takis from the corner store and that's like their meal. So they'd kind of like mix and match, kind of like how you like go to different grocery stores to shop in, I guess, but they were just like essentially savvy shopping the school menu. So yeah, we definitely saw a lot of that happening in the school.
Jarrett, did you want to add in?
Yeah, for sure. If anyone wants to like talk more than me, though. I would definitely step back. But I just have 3 thoughts on the SNAP-Ed situation. If there's any follow-up that you think might make sense, I totally understand where your perspective is, and it's awesome that you're connected to it. I think that we have a mandate funding to support policy, systems, and environment work in schools. So like adult and SNAP-Ed educators, like full-time professionals working to support food environment change can be time spent that like our staff can support. There's and then 2, like youth facing things that could be supportive. I think this is where you're talking about program delivery. What you were saying is like an option in the future. One is school wellness councils and like young people supporting like sort of this work moving forward, and SNAP-Ed can facilitate that. And the other is, and I don't know if this isn't on program delivery, but on your actual project, and maybe we've already talked about this, but youth participatory action research. And if y'all have any capacity or interest to, in this process, involve young people in a participatory fashion in your mixed methods approach and all the research you're doing, like we would definitely work with y'all on that, like through a union. I'm sure other SNAP-Ed partners would too. So those are just some thoughts. And in general, my question is like, it seems like there's just like information that isn't like getting shared in a lot of spaces. So there's just like misunderstandings in terms of what options might be, when the best timings are and things. So just like what type of information do principals receive? Like, and so I looked at the website from the school district, but like what education and sort of like direction are principals getting to share this information with their school community around how the school food program works and why the time of our lunches are this long and that sort of thing?
Yeah. I'll react to your thoughts as like definitely agree. I love that idea to do more involved with youth action research. I did inquire with Temple about hiring high school students to be on the research team, and I got like a boilerplate response of like, well, you can do this. And so I think that was I think we can do it. It just might take a bit longer to get that into action. I think at that point we were just so busy data collecting, but this is a good time to bring them on for sure. So I definitely want to chat with you about that more. And then in terms of the information, so from the lens of food service and the division of food service at the district, they are trying to use the NutriSlice app to get menu information out. And so they ask principals to share that with parents through either Class Dojo or through the classroom, and the degree to which that happens is varied. But apart from that, when we ask principals about what information they get from the district, there was barely any. And we asked questions from them and from climate staff, like, okay, so in your professional development, are there any kinds of like things that the district tells you around school meals or trying to promote participation in school meals, given the relationship between school meals and academic achievement? And a lot of them just said no, they don't really get anything. And even as the climate staff are starting to receive more training and professional development now, a lot of it is just around, again, more sort of behavioral pieces and less around school meals. So to answer your question, not a lot. And the scheduling, which I learned halfway through, was they have a roster chair at every school now that does schedules. And so as you can imagine, the priority is placed on our English, language arts, math, STEM content. And then it seems like meal timing just kind of slots in. And also just knowing that our school food service staff and management are usually hourly employees. My guess is that it's also designed, and again, that's again run by the district, but designed to make their shifts as condensed as possible, because many of them have like second jobs or sleep to get to, and they probably try to make that so that they have as little time in between breakfast and lunch as possible, because time is money, right? Yeah.
So one thing that has been striking me as as you guys have been sharing some of the data for the last few months in our meetings, and again today, is that there is this wide variety, right? Like you think, I mean, not that all Philadelphia schools are a monolith, but you know, there's general trend, you know, like it feels like 80% of schools are all roughly the same in terms of poverty and demographics and, you know, like, and so when I see these like charts where it's like, oh, 50% say it's amazing and 50% say it's awful, it's like, what's really going on here? Because it's the same food, right? And so the thing that I think you were saying, Molly, really struck me, and it's the first time I was hearing this, was that the high participation schools are also the high need, and the ones that are low participation, students still have need, right? It's not like they're not poor schools, but they're not as poor perhaps, or, you know, like the violence isn't as, I mean, so I am just wondering about, and I don't know what the term is, but there is some dynamic in sort of, you know, sociology and class differentiation, you know, like where people who are feeling like they're, you know, like sort of striving and in that like next rung up, that they're sort of rejecting the kind of like whatever, you know, they perceive as like people beneath them. Like we all have these fine-grained distinctions, you know, like everyone's middle class and like, you know, the difference between you and the person, your neighbor that has a little bit more than you and a little bit less versus the person who's way richer or way poorer. And I'm just wondering if there's like something about that just deep perception of school food as this thing for poor people, like, and if you're really like needing it, you're gonna take it, but if you're like just able to not, you're sort of in that like, I'm gonna redefine myself in this other, you know, like I just sort of, I get this dynamic sometimes when I see people who like grew up like riding SEPTA and now refuse and totally reject it as like, oh no, that's something that poor people do, even though that's what they grew up with, because they're, you know, again, trying to sort of redefine themselves as like, now I'm at this next level in my life and I'm just like, I'm going to buy a car and pay those payments if it kills me because I'm never getting on that train again. And I'm just wondering if there's something in there, and I don't know what the answer to that would be, but just, I don't know if that tracks in terms of anything, but that was sort of what I was thinking of when you guys were talking about that difference.
Yeah. And Molly, and you feel free to chime in and agreement, but like we definitely, I think in my mind there's only really one school that I could say is markedly different from the rest of the 7 in the sample, and that did tend to have a bit lower participation. And just from a few of the parents we spoke to, I think there was the idea that some of them, that the need wasn't quite so high, and so it was more of like a, on a day I can't make lunch for my kid, they get school meals, or on a day where they really want the menu item, you know, whether it's like I'm just thinking of an idea, like chicken strips or something, like they're like, okay, like get the food. But yeah, and to be honest, we don't truly know if it is the students that need it the most that are taking the school meals, because again, we're gleaning this from our qual data, which again are valid, but we aren't able to get that individual student level analysis. Right. And that's the grant that we're putting in June, is to understand that and to be able to analyze those data differently. But for better or worse, with the community eligibility provision, we don't collect income data anymore at the household level. And so we don't know exactly who is taking up school meals. What we can do is calculate. Oh, sorry, go on.
So like when the few times, like especially when my kids were really little and I was bringing them to school to show them how to get school meals, because I'm just too lazy to make their food. Like they have to put in their student ID number at the lunch line. Like that's the checkout. So like theoretically, I mean, one can imagine that there is a list, a printout, a database of like who went through the line and got something. And while the district may not have income, I mean, like it exists somewhere. I mean, like you're talking something like on a scale of like Raj Chetty's, like, you know, income and IRS and census, like, but like it theoretically could be done, but
yeah.
Yeah.
So what we have to do now is, and this is, I'm trying to get this grant in, it's due in June, but it's trying to count, we have for every student in the school district, we have data on whether or not they are an identified student or family based on participation in any of the federal assistance, but that's still like a yes or no variable. We don't have, you know, data on household income. Maybe that's okay, you know, but again, it's going to exclude a lot of people who are unfortunately not able to take part in federal assistance, right? Because of either being undocumented or, again, just other reasons. But the best we have is the identified student percentage each for, and then we can understand like what the relative need might be. But again, that's not telling the whole story. Because you might have people that, like families that don't quite meet the ISP and therefore don't receive assistance and therefore maybe even more at need, right? But we just, yeah. So yeah, we're working on that. And the goal is to try to get that analysis done in the next couple of years, especially as we test this implementation intervention out. But yeah, we don't know. We used to be able to know, but that was, again, the best thing is we can provide free school meals to everyone. It's just that the downside is that now we don't have that individual data from applications of school meals. Yeah, Molly and Yuru or Grim, anything else you wanted to add to that? I know that I've been getting all these questions.
I think you hit it pretty on the nose. But even with the participation counts, we did notice, or like even in the interviews, people would talk about how, sorry, I'm getting over a cold, but we did notice that a lot of people would say like they might put in the code and just get like a milk or something and then throw everything out. So even if we did have access to those counts, I don't know how necessarily accurate it would be to people eating the entire meal or even eating the food part of it. Like a lot of kids would say like, oh, like I took the chips or I took like a fruit. But they're still counted like for participation. Even with like breakfast, we saw like variations of like how that was reported and whether that was actually like accurate or not. But it definitely would make things a lot easier if we did have like a better way to measure that, I think.
Sure.
No, I've got a lot of questions. So if anyone else wants to talk, please. But what have y'all noticed anything that's happened in any of the schools or anyone comment on anything that like was an anti-bullying strategy or like a reduced stigma thing that worked?
Yeah, we asked that, or we asked like, what do you think could be done to reduce the stigma? Some people said better food. Some people said like more casual / contemporary ways to serve the meals. So things like grab and go could be good, but then again, the stupid issue with the fact that we have to have counts for obvious reasons, so that like we have to know who takes what, means that that's not always feasible. Gosh, I'm trying to think now, like what students said. They had some really cool things to say. And like other people on the team, feel free to chime in. But some students just said like make the food better, and we were like, we got it, like we hear you. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people had a ton of pragmatic stuff. Yeah, some staff eating with them. And then I know a couple of, I think it was either climate or admin, suggested having more of a peer-led initiative. So kind of like a youth advisory council model, which I think would be really cool to try out. And that's one idea I have off the top of my head to try out, is like our implementation intervention could be something like that. And that could essentially liaise with SNAP-Ed nicely. So there's stuff like that I think would be really good and empowering. And there is evidence out there to suggest that could be helpful. And then I think, yeah, in terms of like increasing participation, when we ask people like, what do you think could be tested out or tried? I think a lot of food service wanted more autonomy over what's on the menu, because they said that they know, they see the kids' reactions every day, they know what they want, and they know the things that aren't going to sell. And so I think that the district's been trying to give them more localized control, with, again, the caveat of it has to meet all these other little checks and balances. I can't think of other things that could be reducing stigma. Yeah, staff eat with them, kids will be kids. Yeah. Yeah. Not a ton of stuff, but
Yeah.
again, just a lot. Yeah.
All very interesting. Thank you. So I think something interesting is that, like, I've never heard of this before. I was just thinking about it, but like freebies aren't free, right? Like but like everyone, like it's like hard to understand this stuff. It's like a lot of information. And so I think how things are communicated, as we all know, is like a real big issue here, that y'all are really helping us dig into all these incredible nuances. So amazing. This is it also does strike that, and I don't know if y'all found this, but like, even some of the positive responses that y'all shared at the beginning, like one of the first ones, I was like, I think it started with like, it's not all bad. And I was like, that's and so there's, and like where you said kids, or some say kids will be kids, like there's this seems like deficit frame a lot of times, which I get, like, I'm not, but it's just like something that, and so just thinking about how SNAP-Ed, I'm just thinking consistently about like where you're like school district administrators, like principals, like they aren't getting information, they're getting an app, like, but like we're supposed to SNAP-Ed partners, like be like the policy, the systems, the environment, like I think, like how can we help in this? And so seems like a lot of work to also. I'm like, wow, there's a lot for Rebel Ventures to do. I am going to make quick plug, Gabby. Thanks for I think I told you about this already, but the book, Transforming School Food Politics, is coming out next Tuesday. And there's a chapter written by a high school student in Philadelphia, Raven Lewis, that worked with Rebel Ventures. She went to Science Leadership Academy. And in the conclusion, talks about Science Leadership Academy is a CTE school, how she thought students in different ways in their academics could contribute to making school food cool, like less stigma or whatever. So to this peer-to-peer thought, there's some, I mean, a lot of the college are incredible. The SNAP-Ed network is incredible and really wants to push this forward if we can. So, that's all. I'll stop.
That's so helpful. Thank you, Jared. Yeah, I definitely feel like now we've been able to digest and just kind of try to be much more systematic and just reflect. I think that we're in a position to really start to have some of these conversations. So yeah, I'm just kind of unsure how or who best to proceed with on this and how it's going to look. But my goal is to have like our schools there, the district there, our CAB there, and then try to sort of make sense of each of those different viewpoints to try to coalesce everything and arrive at something that we can actually test out that could hold up as scientifically valid too, right? Because it is a clinical trial, but it only has to take place within 2 schools with 2 of the controls, so it really can start very small, which is a nice thing. But yeah, I think there's just so much we can do. So I might be pestering you at some point to think about like how best to talk through some of the next steps.
Are there any other final thoughts or questions for Gabriella and her team? I know we lost a few folks to the 2 o'clock hour, but I've already gotten an email asking for the presentation, so I'll be sure to send it out. So seeing none, I want to thank Gabriella, Yuru, Molly, and Garima for being here today and for presenting this information. Lots of very, very good stuff to think about and consider, and it seems like a couple of very good connections were made as well. And I have a feeling you'll be hearing from Jarrett. I don't know why, it's just a vibe I'm getting. And Mignon Verdell from Food Trust as well. So again, thank you all, and thank you all for coming and participating today. Really do appreciate it. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope you stay rain-free.
Thanks, everybody. So
Thanks,
good.
y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
I have tried to stop recording in it.